Welcome to the Journal of Medical Device Regulation podcast from the Global Regulatory Press. I'm Mario Nacinovich, a member of the editorial board of JMDR, and I'm your host for today's discussion. Joining me to discuss her recent article published in JMDR is Kristy Azzolin. Kristy manages operations of research and evaluations at the American Dental Association's ADA Science Research Institute, LLC. She has a Bachelor of Science in Microbiology from Western Illinois University and a Master's in Quality and Regulatory Compliance from Northwestern University. Kristy, welcome to the JMDR podcast.
Thanks, Mario. It's great to be here.
So can you tell us a little bit more about the mission of the organization and more about your role within the organization?
My specialty is dental infection control, so I typically respond to calls and do research projects that relate to infection control items in the dental office: sterilization, cleaning, dental unit water lines, disinfection products. The mission of the ADA's Science Research Institute is to improve the lives of the public through scientific research and the creation, translation, and dissemination of scientific knowledge. I'm also a member of our ANSI ADA Standards Committee for Dental Products, and I'm a member of the Association for the Advancement of Medical Instrumentation, the Sterilization Standards Group. You can find out more about the ADA SRI at ada.org/SRI.
And very appropriately, given your background, you've recently written an article for the Journal of Medical Device Regulation on developing cleaning instructions for reusable dental rotary cutting devices in the context of a risk analysis in the United States. Why is this topic so important?
So dental materials and devices are regulated as medical devices by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Hence, dental device manufacturers have to follow all of the regulations that apply to medical devices, albeit they're a small part of all medical devices on market. While some rotary dental cutting manufacturers have instructions for their instruments, many do not. And the FDA has just held up this as one example in the dental device world where manufacturers really need to step up and just get on board with this whole process. A few years ago, I got a call from a hospital sterilization technician, and he actually had a lip and cheek retractor made of plastic that was used in a head and neck surgery. Now, hospital personnel are very familiar with dealing with a set of manufacturer instructions for every piece of equipment and every instrument that they process in their sterile processing departments. So he was really surprised that this particular item had no instructions with regard to cleaning and disinfection, and even the sterilization parameters for time and pressure and type of cycle were confusing. There was a contradiction in the instructions. And as he's sitting here describing things to me over the phone, and I'm looking for information online at the manufacturer's website, it was really a clarion call to me that this isn't just one type of dental device. This is kind of an area where all dental device manufacturers are lagging and kind of need to really get on board.
Now, what are the main elements of a risk analysis for reprocessing the dental rotary cutting devices?
So dental design engineers and those involved in the quality and regulatory departments at a device manufacturer should be familiar with the elements of a risk analysis because, in fact, they're part of the quality system regulation, FDA 21 CFR 820. Anyone who manufactures any medical device in the U.S. should be familiar with that regulation. So basically the elements of the risk analysis are you want to consider intended use, especially the fact that you have a reusable device that will need to be recleaned and reprocessed through many cycles. You want to identify hazards related to that. And then you want to identify potential harms that could result if the hazard actually unfolded. Once you identify the probability of that harm occurring and the medical severity of that harm, the company then has to decide, are we going to try to remove that harm entirely? Are we going to reduce it as far as possible? Which potential problems are we going to focus on more than others? While you can't remove 100% of risk from everything, you can certainly reduce it to a great degree. And a risk analysis lays out to regulatory people the methodology and the thought process of how a manufacturer went about doing that.
Now, are there any specific standards that manufacturers can follow to help conduct a thorough risk analysis of their various dental devices?
There are a lot of information resources for medical device manufacturers in general, and dental device manufacturers should also find these helpful. First of all, there's international standard ISO 14971 for medical devices, where the title is Application of Risk Management to Medical Devices. And ISO standards apply to manufacturers all over the world. So while I'm in the US and there's people from all over the globe reading this article in JMDR, ISO 14971 would be applicable to everybody.
Okay.
The Association for Advancement of Medical Instrumentation has some guidance documents, technical reports. Those are currently under revision. One is going to be a standard, but they're still very helpful in helping manufacturers work through their validation process for proving an item is adequately clean and how you would clearly write instructions that are feasible for the end user. And then lastly, while this is not a standard, you have the FDA's quality system regulation, which expects US manufacturers to apply a risk-based approach when developing their directions for use. And I'm guessing that even in other countries, there is some counterpart to the FDA and they would have some close similar regulation.
To create that DFU, yeah, absolutely. So your article mentions the concept of product families for validation purposes. How can these help a manufacturer?
One of the concerns that I could foresee a dentist possibly coming up with is that, you know, if there's all these different instructions for every different size and type of burr or rotary diamond cutting instrument that I have, a dentist is not going to sit back and do all these different instructions. So how these could help a device manufacturer is a product family is a group of instruments or equipment that have a common feature or they have a very common intended use. And from that whole group of devices, a manufacturer picks one master device, they call it. And this is supposed to be the most challenging of the entire group to reprocess. So they better have a very good proof to the FDA as to why they're picking one device out of several of the group to represent the master. But they would carry through their validation studies on this one device or a couple of them and wouldn't have to do every single one. And that would help save time and money and effort, and it would really mainstream things. So this is originally a concept that came from Germany. And as far as I can tell, European device manufacturers, I think, tend to exploit this and use this more than US manufacturers would. But the AAMI standards are giving this concept more attention and definitely want to make it more pronounced in one of their messaging. So hopefully it can help a dental device manufacturer who's working with dental rotary cutting instruments.
So now in your experience, are there specific elements of this type of risk assessment that are often overlooked or perhaps not adequately addressed by manufacturers?
While I've never worked on the manufacturing end of medical devices, all of my conclusions here are based on the analysis of the regulations and the standards that I did for the paper. But a documented risk analysis demonstrates that process residuals have been reduced to below acceptable levels. So what that means is, not only are you able to show that you are adequately getting the device cleaned and there's no debris or organic matter on it, but you also need to be able to show that the cleaning process itself does not have an adverse effect on the instrument. So this is where material considerations need to be. Is there corrosion? Is it weakening the plastic if the item is made of plastic? What effect does repeated sterilization and soaking in cleaning solutions have on the device beyond just getting it cleaned? Over time, do these have an effect? So they need to be cognizant of that. And what might help them is to actually have wear data like cutting efficiency or some other parameter that might show where over time, where the wear or the effect of the cleaning process might not allow the device to be cleaned adequately. So this might suggest to the manufacturer that they need to specify a certain number of uses not to exceed or some other measure.
So if you had just one piece of advice for manufacturers who are trying to develop cleaning instructions for their reusable dental rotary cutting devices, what would it be?
Perform cleaning validations per all the standards and guidelines. Start with a risk analysis and have early conversations with the FDA or your regulatory authority. And this will just take a lot of guesswork out and prevent wasting resources. The FDA has forewarned manufacturers for several years now that if reusable devices lack clear reprocessing instructions, they're going to make the manufacturer label them as single use only.
Okay.
If there are reusable medical devices out there, dental rotary cutting instruments, for example, that don't have those reprocessing instructions, and yet they are being reused because they're not labeled as single use, then they're going to consider those misbranded, and that is the regulatory action.
And then we assume a risk of a completely different kind by using these products not as intended. Kristy, you have thoroughly examined and shared literally every aspect of the regulations and standards in the pursuit of developing cleaning instructions for reusable dental rotary cutting devices. I certainly want to thank you for joining me to discuss this issue with the reusable dental rotary cutting devices, and more broadly how this applies to all dental devices and how all dental manufacturers certainly need to get on board. It was great having you on the program here today.
Thanks, Mario. It's been great working with JMDR.
So to find out what is new at Global Regulatory Press, to review other timely and relevant contributions to the latest issue of the Journal of Medical Device Regulation and past JMDR headlines, please visit globalregulatorypress.com. And on behalf of the team at Global Regulatory Press and my fellow members of the JMDR Editorial Board, thank you all for listening. Please follow us on LinkedIn at Global Regulatory Press and on Twitter and Facebook at Global Reg Press. That's GLOBALREGPRESS. Thank you for joining us and making JMDR an essential reference tool for international medical device regulatory and compliance issues.